Welcome to Free Range with Gail of Gaia, and today's guest, attorney and counselor at law, Brent Allan Winters. Brent Winters grew up on a farm north of Moonshine, Illinois. He served as a diver in the U.S. Navy Mobile Diving Unit No. 1 and served aboard the carrier USS Coral Sea. He worked as a geologist and mine operator, ran for U.S. Congress, and Brent has briefed cases in the United States Supreme Court, argued before the jury and appellate courts both at state and federal levels, has represented clients in foreign countries, and clerked for a state appellate court judge. Brent Winters, common lawyer, our common law way of life and thought, says Brent, is not only the lifeblood and backbone of our U.S. Declaration of '76 and the Constitution, but is also the object of zeal that delivered our country to nationhood and remains the fellowship that defines Americans to the world. And now, please join Gail of Gaia as she welcomes Brent Allan Winters to the program.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. This is Gail of Gaia, and this is Free Range, and where we graze on wild ideas. And today I have a very interesting man to speak with us, and he is an expert on common law. And his name is Brent Allan. Brent. I forgot your last name. Winters, right? Brent Allan Winters. Sorry about that. It just my mind just went blank there for a minute. It happens to me now and then.
Well, we've just been introduced.
Yes.
I don't have a clue what your last name is, but I don't need to know.
Okay.
That's okay.
All right. Well, anyway, let's go on. And if you don't mind, just so people are aware of your background and what you're an expert in. Because I've looked over your website, and I would certainly call you an expert in this, and that is common law. So tell us a little bit more about your background, if you don't mind.
Well, let's put it bluntly. I grew up on a farm near a place called Moonshine in the Wabash Valley. Oh, yeah.
That sounds
I know
funny.
more about hogs and chickens and cattle than anything in the world. People call me, say, you're an expert. Well, I've written hundreds and hundreds of pages in books and comparative law, and not to mention legal briefs in court. But my brother told me when we were little, he said, Brent, I've got this figured out. I said, what is it? He said, Malcolm X was famous then. He said, X is the sign of the unknown, and a spurt is a drip under pressure. So an expert is an unknown drip under pressure. And I said, well, as I got older, and then I discovered Voltaire, the French evil empire philosopher. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but he was evil. But he said this, even evil men say intelligent things. He said there are three kinds of liars in the world. There are liars, and there are damnable liars, and then finally, there are expert witnesses. So the word expert doesn't appeal to me a lot, but I know what people mean when they say that. They say, well, Brent apparently knows a little bit of something more than some about this particular subject. And if I do, it's because I've spent years and decades with my head buried in it. And the subject traditionally was called comparative law. But no, I'm from the Wabash Valley. And my father worked in oil field and farmed, and I grew up in that kind of a world, feeding cattle, hogs, chickens, and milking, and the way things are, I wish I were doing more of that now, and maybe I will. But right now, here I am doing what I do, and I'm trying to promote the idea, and have been for decades, but I hope I'm getting better at it. You do get better if you keep trying, getting the point across that we are not the product of the Greek world, the ancient Greeks and all the baloney philosophy they promoted. No, we're not that. We're not like anybody in the world. We are a common law country. No, we're not fundamentally a republic. That's patriot mythology. Do we have a Republican form of government here? Yes, because common law government is a Republican form of government. But we're distinguished from all the rest of the world because we in the English-speaking world, and especially in America, are a common law country, and there's only a handful of us. And every other country in the world is under what we call the Roman civil law, more particularly the code of the Roman Emperor Justinian of the 6th century, who brought the law of Babylon to its highest, most sophisticated form. It's beautiful, like communism, and every communist country is, of course, a Roman code, code of Justinian country as well. All of South America, all of Europe. No, Western, we're not Western culture people. That's fundamentally the Roman system of Europe. We are a common law country, and that distinguishes us. What does that mean? That means we have trial by jury. No, nobody else has trial by jury. It's a creature of our common law. Yes, Gail.
Let me interrupt there. One of the things that I'm aware of is that all of these things are supposed to occur in this manner of common law, but it seems as though the judicial system has been hijacked and we're not operating in true common law anymore. People are guilty until proven innocent, and it's supposed to be the other way around. Could you please address that?
Well, no, and that's important that we consider the breaches. We are a common law country. When I say that, I mean this, that the machinery of our common law is in place. Oh, yes, always and never endingly since the days of Babylon, the law of the city has aggressively attacked, encroached upon, and assailed the law of the land. Our common law, another name for it through the centuries, is the law of the land. In fact, that phrase was still in use when the Americans, the militiamen, the people of America, ratified the Constitution of the United States, called it the law of the land. Why is it then do we have trouble? Well, we have trouble because of evil men. Evil men. The law of the city, the Code of Justinian and its principles, appeals to the evil heart of man. And men all have that. We all have that taint of evil in us.
That duality.
It can be excited and exacerbated. The reformers, back in the days of the Protestant Reformation, called it depravity. It's there. Mm-hmm. Just to drop a footnote, if I might, there's a famous quote from a fellow named Lord Dalberg Emmerich Acton. Lord Acton, they called him. And he said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But that number one, I want to make a point. This has to do with our common law. That is a false statement for this reason. And he's a smart man worthy of our reading. He was an ardent Romanist, and he lived in Britain. But when the Pope came out and said that when his haunches were parked on that throne in the Lateran Palace, the throne of the imperial Pope, that preserved him from ever speaking air, as long as his haunches, his buttocks were parked on that chair. And Lord Acton was an ardent Romanist. And he blew a proverbial head gasket when he heard that. That was back, I believe, in about 1853, somewhere way back there. And he said, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, that's the context of the statement. Mm-hmm. But he went on to say this: there is no doctrine so monstrous, in that same paragraph, there is no doctrine so monstrous as the doctrine that says that the office sanctifies the man. The office sanctifies the man.
Really?
What he said. No, this is amazing because it's so blatantly obvious. You're laughing because it's obvious, but people in power don't see it. They don't want to see it. Mm-hmm. And what it comes down to is sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity. You can't sue the judge. You can't sue the police officer. He was acting within the scope of his duty. Well, he may have been, and he may not have been. Mm-hmm. But if he's acting outside the scope of his immunity, the office doesn't sanctify the man. And that's what Acton was saying. But Acton also said this at the same time. He says, as power increases, the presumption against the rightness of the action should decrease instead of the other way around. And right now, in all of our courts in America, as far as I know, and you can read it, they just say it, mm-hmm. The presumption of rightness of the action of government officials is in place, and it's our job. Then we have the burden of overcoming the presumption of their rightness of their actions. And Acton was right on that point. He said it's got to be the other way around. Why wasn't he right when he said power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely? Because power never corrupted anybody. Man is corrupt before the power ever got there. We're born with that taint of corruption. But what power does is it exacerbates it. You put a man in power, and all of a sudden, like we used to say, give a man a fur coat and he may think he's King Kong. Well, you give him power and he may think he's king. Matter of fact, we're watching that now. We're watching the folk in office that have money, and they're getting more money, they're getting more power, and they're looking utterly stupid at this point. And I use the word stupid in the technical sense, thick and slow. Look at Pelosi. Look at all the dim-witted Democrats, as they call them.
Democrats, I call them now.
Well, are there Republicans that way too? Oh yeah.
Yes.
But right now, it's clear that the Democrat Party has made the dim-wittedness and the demonism their declared doctrine. You don't believe it? Go read their platform. They're all for pedophilia and murdering of babies. How do I know?
No, I can't believe it.
They promote pedophiles. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Gail. Go ahead.
No, it just amazes me. Anyone that could be in favor of a full-term baby being murdered on the spot, that is so gross and such a violation. It's murder. I mean, there's no two ways about it. It's blatant murder. And they're saying they're okay with that. And they're saying it's okay, this pedophilia. No, it's not okay. It's wrong.
I'm glad to hear you say it. That's why I say they look stupid, but more than stupid, they're dangerous, deeply murderous, evilly dangerous.
Yes.
And it's up to us to guard against it. And the question then comes, how do we do that? But I think already, Gail, I did what I feared would happen. I've run afield from the direction you gave me. So if you want to bring me back, that's fine. But
well, that's fine. I have the tendency to do that myself. But I think it's important for people to know what exactly is in the Declaration of Independence that we need to recognize and honor in this day and age, where most people, kids in school, they're not even taught it anymore, nor are they taught about the Constitution. And we need to cover both of those areas.
Okay. Well, okay, let me try that. Thanks for the invitation. By the way, now that we've got a little bit of our motors running, I appreciate you asking me to come on. This is an opportunity for me to say what I believe to be important, and you're asking me the questions that allow that opportunity. Let me start with the Declaration of, well, I call it the Declaration of 76. I do not call it, unless I catch myself making a mistake, I do not call it the Declaration of Independence for a very important reason. That phrase never occurs anywhere in the document, number one. The title that's put on it, Declaration of Independence, was not written on it. And it's not and it is not a Declaration of Independence. Well, what is it then? It's a declaration. It's said forthright more than once, a declaration of shifting dependence. It is a declaration of shifting dependence clearly. We appeal, it says at the end, to the Supreme Judge of all the world for the rectitude of our intentions. Rectitude, that has nothing to do with human anatomy. Rectitude's an old word that means rightness, straightness, shooting straight, being true. We appeal to the Supreme Judge of all the world.
Goodliness and godliness. Goodliness and godliness.
Those are two good words, Gail. But the Declaration is a declaration of shifting dependence for protection and provision from the Crown of England to the Supreme Judge of all the world, the maker of all things and all that in them is. That's what it is. And anybody who would say otherwise is an obvious liar. And why do I say that? Because even if they just make a mistake or repeating what some punky professor told them someplace, even if they're doing that, we have a responsibility to know better by reading the document. One slow reading, and you'll figure that out if you think about it. But it's not about independence, because man is not independent. He is dependent from the get-go. William Blackstone, in his commentaries concerning the Laws of England, some call it the Commentaries on the Laws of England, made the point that man at the beginning, volume 1, first few pages, let's talk about law. He says, we got to know this first. Man at every point is a dependent creature, and everything he has received from above, whether he thinks it's good or bad. God is sovereign, the maker of heaven and earth and all that in them is sovereign, and he has nothing that he has not received from above. Once a fella understands that or accepts it, it's not a matter of understanding it. It's a matter of accepting it, because all men know, if they just stop to consider, that that's true. I wasn't given life because of anything I did. I wasn't given anything I have because of anything I did. I've known people, Gail, I've been on the other side of the world, that work their fingers to the bone for decades. Like the old song says, many a man I've known in my day who lived just to labor his whole life away, like a fiend with his dope and a drunkard his wine. It goes on to talk about, it's a song about a man that works in the coal mines in Western Kentucky. Old Merle Travis song. But hard work is not the reason people have something. You may work hard.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You're saying that so much, because I've said that myself, because some people will say, well, I worked hard all my life. That's why I have what I have. Well, I would preface that with, a coal miner works really hard too.
Yeah. And some people don't work at all and have a lot.
Yeah.
Some people, the Bible says that true wealth is an inheritance, stressing the point that if you have anything, the only place you could have got it was by the leave of the maker of all things. Now, you say, I worked hard and this was the product. Yes, that's true. Like my granddad used to say constantly, I planted, and I cultivated, but the Lord provides the increase. Because some years we'd plant and cultivate and there wouldn't be much increase. That's true too. We did all the work, but that doesn't guarantee the result unless, again, the sovereign lawgiver, and that's what the words in the Older Testament Hebrew and the Newer Testament Greek, El and Elohim and Theos in the Newer Testament mean lawgiver. Now, this comes back to our common law, comes back to the Declaration of 76. What is a lawgiver? Everybody's got one. Everybody claims one, even if it's themselves. But a lawgiver is the final decider of right and wrong in individual instances from whose decision there is no appeal. And whoever you choose to claim to be that, whether it be yourself or some professor or the Pope of Rome or the Supreme Court of the United, your father, your preacher, whoever you claim it to be, that's your final decider of right and wrong. That's your lawgiver. And the maker of all things says, I'm the only true lawgiver. There is no other lawgiver from whose decision there is no final appeal. That's me. And he demands that he be our lawgiver. James says James the Apostle in his epistle, in the Bible, says there's only one true lawgiver. Well, there it is. But that's right. And throughout the Bible, that's the way it's presented. And throughout creation, if you can't see that in the created order that has been revealed to us as we look around, I'm sitting here looking outside it. The leaves are about half off the trees. I live kind of back off in the woods right now. And that's been going on every year I've been alive. And it reveals the laws of the seasons and the natures and the laws. I can look and see the laws, whatsoever a man sows, that also shall he reap. These oak trees out here didn't grow from maple tree seeds. The laws of nature, we see it. And we see it also in the written form, as Blackstone says. Well, the Declaration of 76 starts with this. And I say this because there was a person recently nominated to the Supreme Court who made the statement during the time before the Senate that the Declaration of 76 is not good law in America. It's not good law. It's not law at all. Well, Congress begged to disagree with the courts on that, begs to disagree, made it our organic law, declared it, observed that the Constitution of the United States, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, these are our organic law, expressions of our organic law. The Declaration of 76, along with the Constitution of the United States, They come together like bread and butter. Bread and butter. They're always published together because the Declaration of 76 is a common law complaint of a real case in controversy in a particular instance. That phrase particular instance is part of our common law. And the law of the city countries, all the countries in the world, and even the ones that don't have the Code of Justinian, follow these principles, such as South Africa and the Islamic countries. It's all from Babylon. But all of them, in every case, they have a decree from the will of the government, a legislature, a dictator, and they say that's the law. And it's a broad brush. It's not in individual instances. These governors, Michigan, California, New York, Illinois, that are saying right now, they're saying, you got to wear a mask because the government, and I'm the executive branch, I said so. That's the law of the city. There's no due process to bring that law to the surface. It is not a law. It's not something to be obeyed. It's a lie. And it's them claiming, you were asking, how does the law of the city, the civil law, that's what civil law means, it's Latin, the law of the city of Babylon originally communicated to all the cities of the earth. How does that creep into our world? Watch me close. We have, there's in Illinois, California, New York. You could say this about a lot of other states, including Texas and Nevada. The city, the populations have concentrated in the cities to such a degree that now the cities and the people that live in them and the mindset, the consumptive mindset in the cities have taken over the territory in the rest of the state. Watch me. Territory. What is a territory? Why do we use that word? Territory is from the law of the city. The territory in the days of Rome, and the concept goes on back to Babylon, a territory is the land over which the city extends its terror. Territory,
Tentacles,
and the law of the city tradition is the land over which the city, the law of the city, and what goes on in the city extends its terror. Talked to a lady just the other day from Chicago. I said, well, they tell me that on a clear day in Cook County, that's where Chicago is, on a clear day in Cook County, Illinois, over half of the voters in the state can see the Sears Tower. That makes the point. And that's the way it is in Las Vegas and Reno and Nevada now. That's the way it is in New York now. That's the way it's getting in Texas. Colorado has been taken over through that process. Is growing so fast along the Front Range that the people that live there are controlling. The ranches are gone from Colorado, effectually gone. How do I know? I've gone through, I remember not 12, 15 years ago, this is the law of the city creeping in. Oh, by the way, just to make the point, the great antagonism throughout the Bible from cover to cover and lid to lid is the antagonism between the law of the land and the law of the city.
And we want the law of the land.
What's that?
And we want the law of the land.
We want the law of the land because the law of the land is about the land. Why is it about the land? Because our Maker said, be fruitful, multiply, and scatter over the faces of the land. And Babylon is the epitome of that not happening. And of course, you know, the story of Genesis 11. And men scattered from there because God commanded. The most fundamental duty of man is to make babies. And everybody's a part of that. Even if you don't make babies, you were a baby. And you have a duty to scatter, and you have a duty to dominate. Yeah, dominate. Because if you don't put your energy into dominating the land to the glory of God and your benefit, you will put your energy into dominating your fellow man. What did Jesus Christ say? He said, do not be as the preeminent men. It says princes. That means the predominant men of the nations. Do not be as the predominant men of the nations who dominate one another. No, the fundamental covenant of God with man is that we dominate the land and all that in it is. That's why America, by the way, has been the greatest engine of wealth that the world has ever known. And of course, the evil empire wants to destroy that, and this whole virus thing is part of that.
Yes.
Well, that's the Declaration of 76, just to say a few words. Let me mention the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States wasn't drafted to change anything. It was drafted to keep what we already had. What they call the revolution in America wasn't a revolution at all. There was nothing revolving about it. South America has revolutions. That's all they have down there. Revolution is part of the law of the city, the constant revolving of power. And bloodshed and war in doing so. All the communist countries, law of the city, they're under the code of Justinian. Even Japan, the Orient, Vietnam, China, they're under the code of Justinian. Japan is under the code of Justinian, still is. In its German form called the Code of Bismarck.
Okay, if I might interject there just quickly.
Yeah, give me a breather.
People would say that the United States has been at war for practically since it was initiated. And that is not, I'm sure that is not God's will. And I don't think that it's like the law of the city that rules the people in the top that makes that happen, because many of them were based on lies anyway.
The law, go ahead. I don't
know. How do you address that? Go ahead.
Yeah, the law of the city is a law of never-ending revolving violence, never ending. Mm-hmm. Even in our own country, when Abe Lincoln, the night that William Booth put a bullet into his head, Lincoln was just one that was intended for assassination. The secretary of what became the Interior later, I suppose, but Seward, he was targeted. Secretary of War, Lewis Stanton, was targeted. But that very night, Seward, before any of that happened, but that very night, before it happened, Seward said publicly, and it was recorded, that assassination will never be a part of our American tradition, as it is in other countries, and it is, because we are a common law country. Now, Seward was shot that night. It is no accident. It is no accident that the people that did that, William Booth being the most famous, they were all Romanist. It was part of their deepest held conviction, the law of the city, because the Roman Church is governed by the canon law. The canon law is the code of Justinian put to an ecclesiastic purpose. The Bible is not the final rule of faith and life in Romanism. The canon law is. Now, you say, Brent, you're being bigoted. No, well, I am an historian. I want to be utterly honest. That's utterly the honest truth. The canon law governs one other country in the world, and that happens to be Ethiopia. Ethiopia in the Greek Orthodox Church has the canon law, also the Code of Justinian. The difference is the Eastern Orthodox Roman, it's a Roman church too. There are differences, but it's Roman. It was the vestige of the Roman Empire. Mm-hmm. But it has it in the original tongue of Greek, whereas the Romans have put it in Latin. Here's a fascinating point. I want to bring this up, if I may, Gail. The Code of Justinian, as I'd said, governs every country in the world except about 5 major common law countries and all of their former colonies. For example, the United States was a former colony. India has a lot of common law in its tradition, the jury, that kind of thing. The jury is a creature of our common law. The right to keep and bear arms is part of our common law, not available in the rest of the world as a fundamental right. What's a fundamental right? A fundamental right, we say at common law, is a responsibility. It's not, the word right has been hijacked. That's an old Germanic word, right, made famous during the days of Hitler. What it means is, used in the right context, it means duty. And our common law among the Germanic and Nordic tribes of Northern Europe before they came to Britain, our common law they called in those days the Volkrecht. The Volkrecht, what does that mean? Volk is our word now in our Anglo tongue. Folk, our Anglo tongue is a Germanic tongue. We still have the word, we've changed it a little. We don't say Volk with a V as in Victor. We say folk. What is folk? Well, that's the people. Well, who's the people? That's the militia. Well, who's the militia? That's the able-bodied males. That's what the militia is. The folk, and that's the way they understand it. They had another word for their militia. They called it the Fyrd, F-Y-R-D, the Fyrd. And the ancient tribes had right to trial by jury, all those kind of things. I'm going to drop a footnote here, a fascinating footnote of history. The reason the Roman law finally engulfed northern Germany, Saxony they call it, was because of Martin Luther. Because of Martin Luther. He had no idea that would happen. The Code of Bismarck had not been received up there, and that's from whence our common law came to Britain. with the migration of those Scandinavian and Germanic tribes, the Saxons and the Jutes and the Anglos, the Angels as they call them, the Jutes or the Danes, formerly the Vikings. Of course, the Norwegians came and others, but they all had, and the Celts, and they all had fundamentally, according to Algernon Sidney, Discourses on Government from the 17th century, they all had that their law and government was strikingly alike, he said, I'm quoting, strikingly alike not only in particulars or generalities, but in particulars. And that's our common law. But because Luther was fighting Rome, the Roman legions and the Church of Rome had never really conclusively conquered Saxony. They tried it, and they were decimated at the most influential in time battle. To us as Americans, the most influential battle, arguably, that ever occurred, most have never heard of. It was the Battle of Tübingen Forest in the year 9 AD, and it was the Germanic tribes versus the Roman legions. And Herman, or Hermann, as they would say, Herman the German, we call him, he decimated them, slaughtered right at 20,000 Roman legionnaires, and prevented Rome from ever coming up there again and trying to conquer them and foist the law of Rome upon them. Well, when Luther was fighting Rome in the form of the Roman Church, which is the imperial church, of course, and as Gibbons said, the Pope of Rome is the ghost of Rome, sitting on the grave of Rome, and rightly added, wielding the law of Rome, which is the Code of Justinian, the canon law. Mm-hmm. Well, Luther was desperate. It was a struggle of life and death in those days, of course. And they wanted to kill Luther, the Pope and his minions, and they tried hard to find a way to do it. But finally, the protectors of Germany, the electors, they called them, of Germany, they were the ruling men. They took a shine to Luther and they protected him. And he finally said to him, look, we're not going to win this war unless you take on the Roman law so that you electors, can have the immediate militaristic type power to fight what Rome is doing. That's what they have. Fight fire with fire. This is war. Mm-hmm. And they did. And because of that, we got the Germany of Bismarck and the Germany of Adolf Hitler, the Nazi Germany. Now, I don't fault Luther for that at all. He had no idea. He was fighting a life and death struggle that we cannot comprehend. All of Europe was in the grip of Babylonianism and the abuses. It was beyond anything that we could imagine. We think we have it bad here. It is bad, and it's up to us to stop it wherever it pops
Yeah, it's
up.
gotten out of hand. I mean, it didn't used to be as bad as it's gotten to, and part of that started with the Patriot Act and different things that Congress has been responsible for, and people. The elections have been selections and not really elections. We have a lot of things to clean up in our country. One of the reasons people used to want to come here was because it was better than anywhere else. Well, now it's getting in a bad way and not being what it used to be. And part of that, and I'd like you to address this as well, all began with the Admiralty Law and the birth certificate and the certificate bonds that were created as a result. And there are so many people that are totally unaware of this, how it turns you into a person. And technically we're men and women. We are not persons. That's even addressed in the Bible.
That's good. Okay. Well, let me talk about that. Appreciate you asking me. Nobody and no power can ever make me what I ain't. Nobody. I don't care how hard they try. Mm-hmm. I don't care how many birth certificates they get. I don't care what they say about those birth certificates. They may do all those things. That does not change the truth of the matter, because fraud doesn't change anything. The only thing that might change things is if I submit to the foolishness of what all the Bible says. The Bible says, come out of her, my people. Out of what? Out of Babylon. Out of Babylon, the system. How do you get out? You quit going along with it. You got a diaper on your head like 99% of the Americans? Take it off. You have gone along with Babylon. Go ahead.
No, I just meant thank you for saying that. I'm so tired of seeing people with these masks on their face. I want to see your face. Don't you want to breathe oxygen? That's what we were created to breathe, not carbon dioxide, not your own waste. But that's a whole nother off the subject kind of thing.
No, it
But
isn't, Gail. No, it isn't, Gail. It's not. You're hitting the nail with your head, and you're talking like you're from Middle America someplace, like you got some sense. These people on these two coasts, that's where all the billionaires live, all of them. There's two kinds of people that support this foolishness. Number one, it's the ultra wealthy, and number two, the ultra poor. And the Democrat Party has lost entirely at this point the middle. And not many years ago, I ran for Congress 25 years ago. And even the fellow I ran against, he was a gospel singer. Him and his brothers, they had a quartet. And so for his television commercials, he sang a tune called We're for the Working Man. It was a great tune, great tune. But on the other hand, the truth is they weren't for the working man. They were part of the Democrat Party. And now the mask is off, and the Democrats have lost entirely the working man and middle America.
yes,
They've abandoned him entirely, but the Republicans are getting him. That's the political reality of what's going on. But the Democrats do have the ultra wealthy, not the millionaires, the billionaires on the West Coast and the East Coast. Like John McCain's wife came out in support of Biden. Well, John McCain's wife is the heiress to a fortune of one of the largest, if not the largest, Budweiser beer distributor in the country. She didn't have a clue what it means to go to the store and buy bread. She doesn't have a clue what it means to worry about not having enough money to get through to next week or having to work for your money. So she can afford, she thinks, to support Biden. Oh, yes, he's such a nice, and Trump is so offensive when he talks. My goodness, why would anybody want to be around a mean man like, and all that kind of therapeutic malarkey? That's therapeutic malarkey. The truth is, Donald Trump is not running for Sunday school superintendent. He's running for president of the United States.
And he will win it. I'm quite confident of that again. But anyway, that is a serious issue. And McCain was a traitor to this country, and regardless of what they say. And I know that to be a fact. And he was from this state. Are you hiding behind your computer?
No, I was trying to cross my legs. Now, you can't see it, Gail, but I've got a discarded.
I don't know if what I said offended you, but I wouldn't think so.
It's a discarded blueberry fruit box, see? And I I set that on my lap because if I put my computer on my lap, my blood, when I said, of course, the largest pooling area of blood in your body is your thighs, and it warms that blood up, and I start to get sleepy. So that's why I do that. But I'm not trying to cover my face. I like to let people see me, and I think maybe I communicate better. I don't know. I like to look at people when they talk.
Well, that's part of the problem with the masking of people.
Yeah.
And that, isn't that interesting that person actually in Greek means that?
Well, it does. Now, let me carry that
put up and shut up.
Yeah, you brought that up just before we got on. I said, boy, that's a good point. Now, let me tell you a little more to flesh this out a little bit. We're not Greek, as many classics say, oh, everything we are is from the West. No. What were the Greeks into? They were into being hypocrites. I mean, that was their culture. Why do I say that? And this will go along with you making the point that the word person is the Latin. Get this. The word person is the Latin root for hypocrite. Why do I say that? Watch me close. Because in the Latin tongue, which is part of the Greco-Roman tradition, a person, the persona, was the mask that the Greek actor held up to his face, and he'd play two parts, or maybe three. He'd have one mask for one part, another mask for another part, then he'd have his own face if he wanted for another part. Those are the Greek actors in the theaters.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Okay, so persona was the mask. Jesus Christ said this, and he was speaking directly to this concept.
Okay.
In the Greek-speaking world, because the New Testament written in Koine Greek, the street language of the Greek-speaking people all over the Roman Empire, not the classic Greek, but the Koine. He said, "Oi!" Well, we translate that, "Whoa," W-O-E. What does it mean? It means you're irreversible.
You all of a sudden got very quiet. I don't know why.
Who did? I did?
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, but your sound level went down, and I think what you're about to say is very important. So,
Oh,
um,
okay. Well, let me try it again. I don't know there's much I can do. I got her turned up, but
okay.
he said, "Oi," loudly. Well, that's a Hebrew word transliterated into Greek, and it means irreversible doom. Irreversible doom. Who was he talking to? He was talking to the Pharisees, his antagonist. And he said, "Woe, irreversible doom unto you, scribes." That's the notary's public. That's
Mhm.
a Roman law office, by the way, not a common law office. Woe unto you, scribes, notaries public, and Pharisees. Then what did he say? Hypokratos. Hypokratos. The word hypokratos in the Bible, it's put transliterated. It's not translated at all. It's transliterated, trying to reproduce the sounds of the Greek word in the English tongue. Hypokratos is the word that answers to the Latin persona, the mask, but it says more. Hupo is a preposition. Hypo, like a hypodermic needle, means a needle that goes under the skin. That's a Greek word. Hupo means under, and kratos means to answer. Hypokratos means to answer from under a mask. Hypocrite. What's a hypocrite? He's somebody that's pretending he's somebody he isn't. Hypocrite. I one time, one of those moments in my life when, oh, I won't forget this. You had a brush with a famous person, and I was asked at a political meeting to introduce Charlton Heston. This has been 25 years ago, about. And I introduced him. It was very much enjoyable. But before I introduced him, he came on, or after I introduced him, rather, then he made his speech. And I remember he said that when his little boy was a little boy, his little boy went to school in the first grade, and they went around round robin as they do. What's your name, and what does your daddy do? Tell us what your name is. This was back, of course, in the late 50s, early 60s, when people had daddies and they did something. Today, if you did that, it would be embarrassing to some. They wouldn't know who their daddy is. But they asked, and all the little children were saying what their daddy did. And he said to his boy when he came home from school, he said, what did you say your daddy did? Charlton Heston now. He said, well, I told him my name, and I said, my daddy makes a living pretending to be other people. My daddy makes a living pretending to be other people. Listen, that's dangerous.
True.
That's true, and it's exceedingly dangerous. And the horrid lifestyles of thespians and actors in Hollywood witnessed to the danger of doing that. Back in the Greek city-states days, back in the Greek-speaking world, the Hellenistic world, when somebody said prostitute, they also said wino and stage actor. Those were three words that always went together. Hookers, winos, and stage actors. Why? Because they were the expression, those particular stages of life were the expression, the lowest expression and most visible expression of the depravity of man. Stage actors. It's still true today. You can see it. Well, when Jesus Christ said that, let me give you a translation. Well, let me finish this, then
Okay.
I'll shut up. Let me give you the translation of hypokratos, then I'll quit. Stage actor. That's what it meant to the Greek. And when Jesus Christ said that, he was saying, oi, irreversible doom to you, stage actors, scribes, and parasites. Back to you, Gail.
Oh, that's great. I had never put that together before, but I really like that. I guess one of the things that I was going to say is now in this day and age, we are finding out all of the evil deeds of these actors and actresses, which are beyond comprehension of most people.
Pedophilia being a big part of it. Who are we kidding? And sodomy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and satanic rituals
Yep.
and so on for the benefit of getting fame and wealth and all these other things that don't matter shouldn't matter in this world, but they do to some people, and they're willing to sell their soul in order to have them, and that's a real shame. On the other hand, as far as a thespian is concerned, it could be argued that for entertainment purposes, at times there were different shows or stage acting that represented life and different problems for people, and somehow was a form of entertainment and information for people. Since I found out some of the things that I found out about these actors and actresses, I can't even watch their movies anymore. And there is also another fact that much of it involved programming of the human mind into something, or into the belief of something that wasn't actually true. So anyway, that's basically all I wanted to say. But that's...
Well, can I go back to Gail
Sure.
with your permission and clean up, because I get wandering too much. But we talked about the Declaration, then you asked me about the Constitution. There's some
Yes.
things I want to say about it.
Yes, please.
And I want to say this. I want to. My website, Gail, is www.commonlawyer.com, and on that website you can get my books. One of them is Constitution of the United States and Declaration of 76, a common lawyer comments clause by clause. That one, and of course there's also...
I saw that. I definitely would like to see that. Yeah.
And also the comparative law text of 958 pages, Excellence of the Common Law. What is the common law, and what's the Constitution got to do about it? Let me say this quickly. I don't want anybody to miss this. If you don't get anything else, I hope you get this. Our common law, the ancient Volk right, the law of the land, it's been called different things. We call it our common law today. The law of the land is not a list of rights and wrongs. It's not a list of laws at all. What is it then? It is a course, a way, a manner of living, a life. It's a course you get on. For instance, the first Congress met, and on the 14th of October, the year 1775, met in Annapolis, Maryland, I believe, before there was any Washington, D.C. And they wrote a letter. They made a resolution and wrote a letter back to Parliament and King in England. And they said, we demand the benefits and the enjoyment of this is the year 1775, our Constitution. Our Constitution? Their Constitution, as we understand it, wouldn't be written for another 11 years, wouldn't be ratified beyond that. What in the Sam Hill were they talking about? Well, the people in England knew what they were talking about, our Constitution. What was their Constitution? It was their common law. They said, most especially of the inestimable, that right, that benefit, that duty of inestimable worth, trial by jury. That's what they said. That was their Constitution. Our Constitution of the United States. Our Constitution of the United States is not a list of laws. It is our common law. And the Constitution of the United States, if you can picture with me, the trunk of an oak tree, a large, strong oak tree. And that's the Constitution of the United States. And it's rooted deep in our common law, from which it draws everything it has. Everything in our Constitution. You can't understand our Constitution unless you know what the words and phrases mean. Our Constitution explains nothing. It just throws it out there. But the people that ratified it knew what those words and phrases meant. They were couched. The whole thing, as Supreme Court Justice Taft said, the whole thing, every word, every phrase is couched in the words and phrases of our common law. And if you don't know what those words and phrases mean, you won't have a clue. And who does? Not hardly anybody, including judges and lawyers, unless they look into it real
That's
smart.
amazing to me. They don't.
No, they don't. But who does? Who's taught it? At first, it's not our fault.
It's not taught anymore.
I go further and say I don't know that it ever was in America. We just knew it. We expected we will always always know it. But then it just flitters away. Like Justice Story said, my great fear, writing about almost 1840 in his commentaries on the Constitution, he said, it's my great fear that this provision of our Constitution, just as an example, speaking of the Second Amendment, this provision of our Constitution will be forgotten and ignored, and with it, we will lose the palladium and the reality. of our fundamental rights. What's the palladium? Remember old palladium, remember Have Gun Will Travel? Have Gun Will Travel was an early 1950s television sitcom. Sitcom? No, that's not it. Just a weekly program.
It was a Western, yeah.
It was a Western.
My grandfather used to watch it.
Yeah. Well, that makes me feel old. I used to watch it, but he called himself with that root word palladium. What is palladium? He said, we'll lose the palladium and the reality of our freedoms. Well, what's the palladium? That's the sign. He says the Second Amendment is the badge, the sign, the mark that says we are free. But not only is it the palladium, that's an old Greek word, but it's also the reality. But it only arises out of our common law. You won't find in any country in the world that's not a common law country the right to keep and bear arms. It's in other countries, if they have anything like that, it's only by permission of the powers that be. In America, we have it in our fundamental document, our common law. The Constitution of the United States is a brief of common law government. It was put in place to say, we're not changing anything, and we didn't. All of our courts stayed in place. Our colonies just turned into states. Everything was the same. 3 branches of government, independent and co-equal. No one branch trumps the other one in our common law country. That's what our Constitution put in stone, so to speak.
Hasn't that been usurped at this point in time?
It usurped at a lot of points, but that doesn't mean, I like to demonstrate it this way, if I may. When I was a boy, it was among my chief duties to pump water. And I pumped water for hogs and chickens and cattle. And I pumped water for the house because we had running water. People say, did you have running water? Oh, yeah, we had running water in the house. It was me and my brothers running with the bucket to get the water. Yeah. Well, anyway, I'd pump water. Mm-hmm. And we had pumps and have 2 cisterns by the house. We had wells out by the horse tank, and over on the Hardway place, we had I'd pump water. But we'd pump water so much that the way water is pumped in those old pitcher pumps, we call them, on top of the well, had a handle. You'd swing the handle up and down. Mm-hmm. There was a leather valve down in the bell housing. You drop down in the well or the cistern. The bell housing is a big round thing in the pipe. And inside that bell housing, there was a leather valve that went up and down. Well, after so long, leather wears out. And when it wears out, it won't flop anymore. You draw the water up, the water comes up, then the valve, poof, pops down, and that keeps the water that you drew up right there. And then you pump it again immediately, and more water comes up under that, and you get it then running out the spout. Once you get her going, it just keeps sucking because you got that water in there. But if that valve wears out, you got to pull that out of there, that pipe, and you got to take a log chain, throw around it, and put a crowbar on it, and take a big pipe wrench and screw that bell housing apart. Then you got to drive to town to the hardware store and it's a valve. It's a long process, so we just never got around to doing it a lot of times. So what we had to do is this. When you get done pumping the horse tank full for the cattle, then you have a quart jar sitting on the well curb, and you fill that jar with water and you set it on the well curb. And that way, after the water drains out, it won't pump again, and because the valves wore out. So you pour that water, that quart in the top, and you start swinging that handle like a madman, and you get that water drawing again. But if you forget to put that water back on the well curb, it won't draw. You won't get any water. You won't have anything to prime it with. You got to prime the pump.
I'm losing your point here.
Well, we have all the machinery. We've got the pump. We've got the well, our common law traditions in place, trial by jury is in place, the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of all the states of the Union are in place. They're all common law government except one, that's Louisiana, because of the strong French Roman Church influence down there. But all the rest of the states, all under common law, machinery is in place, just like the pump, but the valve's worn out. Well, what do we need to do? We've even got the water to prime the pump. All we have to do is prime the pump and start swinging the handle. And it's always there for our use. That's the point I'm making. People say, but the people are doing this and doing that. Yeah, they are. Whose fault's that? It's your fault and it's my fault. but we're not screaming loud enough. We're not saying, no, this is the government. We're not saying, I go into court and my clients, what can I do for them? Can I win the case for them? No. Not really, a lawyer can't do that. No, it's not his decision. Whose decision is it? It's either the judge or the jury. It's not mine.
It never should be the judge, in my opinion.
Well,
he's just one man.
Well, if the man wants the judge and doesn't want the jury, he can say so. If he wants that, he has a right to do that. What I'm trying to get across in all this talk I'm making is, as a lawyer, or if you're a litigant without a lawyer, your duty is to ensure that due process is followed. You are not the master of the verdict. No. You're the fellow that's supposed to ensure the process is followed. What is our common law? We're coming back to that. It's the way things are done. It's not the verdict. It's not the ultimate conclusion. It's the way, the path we get on, and we stay on it. When I say, wait a minute, you violated due process. In this case, the prosecutor violated due process. What did he do? He searched my client's home without a warrant. I want that stopped right now. This shouldn't go no further. He's got to follow the process. If you're going to take away a man's life, liberty, property, or a combination thereof in a criminal trial, we ask you to follow the modest inconvenience of the process called due process. What is our common law is the process, period. It's not anything else. Back to you, Gail.
That's very interesting. And I would just like to make a point about that from personal experience of a search warrant going forward and not being given to you until after the fact, after it's done, and it looked totally bogus right from the start. So in a situation like that, wouldn't that be something that, the attorney or whatever should bring up?
Oh, certainly. But here's another problem that arises when you do that. The courts have become, as Justice Scalia once put it, bureaucratic minded. They go along with the prosecutor. Why? Because, again, this is a common law, part of our common law tradition, the way we do things. At common law, judges are not appointed from government employment. Judges are not appointed from government employment. They're appointed, in common law tradition, from the private practicing bar. You look at the people on the Supreme Court and the federal bench now, what do you got? A lot of ex-U.S. attorneys, ex-prosecutors, and ex-government lawyers. Exactly. Do you have very many that have ever practiced law? Well, consider the recent appointment. Was there really ever the practice? No, these people, by and large, are purely academians. They've never gotten down and dirty and said, I'm going to defend somebody from hell, and I'm going to go up against the beast, the evil empire. I'm going to do it. There are a few. This gal right now that's screaming bloody murder about prosecutorial misconduct, she was a U.S. attorney. Has she ever really practiced law? No, she hasn't. Being a U.S. attorney is not the practice of law. Being a county prosecutor is not really the practice of law. Or being a judge. In all of the Roman law of the city world, if you're a judge, you're not even a lawyer. You're trained specially to be a judge, and you're part of the civil service ranks, and you depend for your job and your pay upon the powers that be. And if they don't like you, you're not supporting the agenda, they get rid of you. That's why we want men. Scalia put it this way. I'm glad he said it. He said, you take a man that's been defending people's life, liberty, and property in the courts, a lawyer, all his life, and put him on the bench. Is he going to understand the criminal and the prosecution that's going on a little better? Yes. But then he said, you take a man who's been swilling. I like that word swilling. That makes me think of a pig. Mm-hmm. Swilling at the public trough as a U.S. attorney, a prosecutor, a corporate lawyer, or a government lawyer working for ATF or one of those kind of FBI agent lawyers. You take those and put them in as judges. Who are they going to favor? I'll tell you who they're going to favor. They're going to favor the prosecution. Why?
Of course.
Because it's natural. Because, like Billy Budd said, they had him on the scaffold, had the rope around his neck. He was a sailor, a British sailor. And just before they hung him, he said, he screamed out, I have eaten the king's bread. Therefore, I am loyal to the king. Listen, whoever butters your bread, by nature, and that's the way God made us, we're going to support them. Whoever butters your bread. Mm-hmm. And by the way, whoever you depend upon for your provision and your protection, is your master. Whoever you depend upon for your provision and your protection is your master. You better make sure that you depend for your provision and protection on the maker of all things, because if you don't, you will be a useful idiot of the evil empire. You look around and see who's supporting this face mask situation. Mm-hmm. It's the people that are afraid to lose their jobs. That's what it is. Back to you, Gail.
Wow, that is so true. Now, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it doesn't matter if it's the prosecutor, the defense attorney, or the judge, they all swear an allegiance to the court itself. So the third one that gets...
I'm sorry, finish your question.
The third one that gets so-called justice is the man that's been accused of something.
Well, I don't know of any judge, any prosecutor. I was a prosecutor for 30 days. I had to take the oath. I filled out another man in a small rural county. I filled out his term. So I took that oath. I've taken the oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States by my count now 7 times, because I was a military man in different contexts for quite a while. Mm-hmm. I've taken the oath. I've taken it as a lawyer. I know the judge. I've taken it as a prosecutor. I will say affirmatively, no judge has ever taken an oath to the court. No prosecutor has ever taken an oath to the court, and no lawyer that I have ever known in America has ever taken an oath to the court.
Okay, so that tells me that the oath that is taken is to the Constitution. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if they are violating the Constitution, who oversees that? How is that rectified?
It's in the final analysis, the rectification is political, from the political process. In other words, the people of the United States, ultimately, you take, for example, a federal judge. What can you do if he goes haywire? Well, the Congress of the United States has the power to get him out of office. Mm-hmm. And they can do it just like that. Do they do it? No. They should do it. How about judges on the state courts? The legislatures of the state have the power to take him out of office just like that. Do they do it? No, they don't. Should they? Yes. They should show them every once in a while who's boss. What if they don't do it? At the state level, a lot of states, the people have the power to vote them out. It takes a lot to vote them out, but it can happen. And it should happen. That's the remedy. Are we doing anything? Well, no, we're afraid, aren't we? We're afraid to go out and campaign against a judge. Why? Well, our son, our daughter, our nephew, or ourselves, we may be in front of that judge on a criminal or a non-criminal case. We don't want to offend him, do we? What does it take to make...
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gail.
No, I just said that's pathetic, isn't it? Go ahead.
Yes, it is pathetic, and I understand why it's true, but it isn't right, and it won't work. Here's what we've lost, Gail, in my humble studied opinion. There was a time when men spoke their minds. Why? Because they didn't depend on anybody but themselves. And there are fewer and fewer of those kind of creatures in America that don't depend on anybody but themselves. Who depends upon themselves? Well, fundamentally, men that farm, they depend upon themselves. And fundamentally and historically, they take the price for their products that men give them when they take them to the market, and they're not cutting that many deals, and they don't care. They do speak their minds. It's historically been that way. There are fewer and fewer of those kind of men. There has to be a critical mass of those kind of men. They don't have to be farmers. I'm just making the point. There are some things about our country that have been true in the past, and have been a critical mass of those kind of men. In my home county, Gail, in the year 1990, their census was taken, and there were over 1,500 full-time farmers in that little county. Now, the largest town in that county was 3,000 people. It's a very small county. But there were 1,500 full-time farmers. The census of 2000 said there were right at 750, right about half as many. And I haven't looked at the census of 2010, but I suspect it's even smaller now. The more we become, I say this as a matter of fact, people say, oh, Brent, what are you saying? No, the more we become cityfied, the worse it's going to get. Exactly. I started talking about that in the beginning. Yes. Here's one of the things this COVID virus has done for us. It has driven people out of the cities. I mean, in mass, like almost never before in the history of America. Chicago is emptying. San Francisco Bay Area is emptying. And even California, the people that live out in the hinterlands are leaving at such a rate. I know this from, I saw it myself. You can't even get a U-Haul truck to move your goods out of California.
It's happening in New York too.
That is a fact in the rural areas of California even. Well, that tells me that people are migrating. Of course, the problem always is, coming back to what I talked about at the beginning, wherever a man goes, what does he take with him? Inevitably, he takes himself. And what's the problem with that? Well, a lot of them acclimated to the city life. And it has shown, that's what happened to California, Northern California. People got out of LA back in the 80s. Well, they went to those places in Northern California, very rural, and they ended up demanding the same things when they got there that they were used to down in LA County, and destroyed some of those areas. If the only way, moving to the countryside is a start, and it's the start that God commands, by the way. That's a theme of the Bible from start to finish. What did God do for the people, the sons of Israel? He took them out of the law of the city down in Egypt. What was Egypt doing? They were building cities. Read the book of Genesis. They were building cities and moving men off of the land into the cities, families. What did Russia do after the revolution of 1917, October? They built cities and moved men off of the land into the cities, bust them out to work the farms. It didn't work. What is China doing today? They're building cities, entire cities, and then persuading the Chinese people off of the land into the cities. Why? Because that's what the law of the city has to have. It has to have the city. The city has to be there. The same thing happened, though, of course, when Abraham left the city, the preeminent city of his day called Ur of the Chaldees. That's light. Ur is Semitic for light. He left the city. He just got out and started walking. And he went to a land that God, of course, gave him and his descendants. What about Lot and his wife and his family? What did God command them to do? Get out of the city. They got out of Sodom and everybody got killed because they laughed at their father Lot. He got out. 2 of his daughters got out with him. His wife was killed because she hesitated to get out. How about a few other, there are many other examples just in the Bible alone. Jesus Christ said to the people of his day, when you see these things happening, what things? Well, he gave them a whole list of things there in Matthew 24. When you see these things happening, do not go back and get your coat. Do not hope you are not suckling a child when it happens. Hope it's not in the winter, but you get out and do what? Get out of the city and head for the hills. 70 AD, what happened? The Titus, general officer of the Roman legions, came down. Then his son took command. They were moving in on Jerusalem, and about 100,000 people that lived in Jerusalem, followers of Jesus Christ, said, what did he say? What did he say when he said, we saw these things? He said, get out. And they got out. Another 100,000 approximately said Jesus Christ is a liar and a lunatic. And they didn't get out. What happened to them? The Romans slaughtered them. I don't mean a little bit. They were so mad by the time they got into the city, and they'd lost so many legionnaires that the Roman officers turned them loose and they slaughtered man, woman, and child, and infirm and old.
That's happened in every communist country too.
Yes.
And that's what they're trying to do here right now is implement a form of communism, Marxism, and people aren't seeing it, and it's very scary. But on the note of getting out of the city per se, it's very difficult for people because it takes money, and money, of course, is a slavery tool. It always has been. But at the same, so how are people supposed to do that?
Here's how it happens. After long contemplation, because that question that you brought up is the question that must be dealt with. And my conclusion, I'll give it to you for what it's worth, Gail. Abraham being the prototype of all people that got out of the evil empire. And the only way, and by the way, we know from history, from other history, substantially true, probably not part of the Bible, but we know that he was there and he was part of the system and he was doing pretty good. He had to give all that up. How do you do something like that? Not knowing where you're going and not knowing what you'll eat. How do you do it? There's only one way. And the Bible majors on this theme. And I'll give you the most, well, it's the initiating verse, the initiating passage of the Bible, Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. God told Abraham what he was going to do, gave him the covenant, the trust settlement. And it says, verse 6 of chapter 15 says, the Hebrew text says this, Wahe'amen ba'adonai, we'achveha lo sadaka. Now notice the first word, Wahe'amen. Wahe'amen. There's the word amen. It's the verb form of the word amen. And he, that is Abraham, amened God. What does that mean, the word amen? It means he affirmed what God had just told him. He said, I agree. What's the other translation of that word amen? Trust. Trust. You cannot obey your maker unless you trust what you don't know, which is the future. It's impossible. And that's what he demands of his people. And by the way, he says, I will give you the gift of that trust. I'm the sovereign giver. I'm the sovereign giver. That's another theme of the Bible. Who gives trust? How do you get it? You don't work it up in yourself. But if you read what God has said, he will infuse trust in you. He promises that. Trust, said Paul the Apostle in his epistle, to the Romans. Trust comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Hearing the word of God is the seed of God. Peter goes on to say, the word of God that enters the ears is the sperma in the Greek text. Sperma, sperm. And when the sperm, the seed of the word of God, penetrates the ovum of faith, this is the analogy Peter uses. What happens? Conception. Trust is born. The new birth is inevitable. Whatever is conceived will inevitably be born. You can't stop it. It's going to happen. May not be a good birth, may be a good birth, but it's going to be born. And the conception that God gives in initiating what Jesus Christ told Nicodemus is the new birth, the birth from above, anageneo. It comes from the infusion of the word of God as a sperm, penetrating the ovum of faith, And that gamete, the gamete, to go back to high school biology, that forms there, by analogy, is where the trust, where a man is enabled to trust in his maker. I would refer the reader. I'm not a Lutheran. But one of the great figures of our history of Europe is Martin Luther, not because he was a great man. No, I said he was a great figure. But God used him in a great way. He didn't know it was going to happen. But he said himself that the greatest of his works, the greatest of his writings, was a book he wrote in response to Erasmus called Bondage of the Will. Bondage of the Will. And in that book, he argues cogently and completely that only Jesus Christ can release the will of man to do what God tells him to do. And that release, Jesus Christ further elaborated. He said, whomever the Son makes free is truly free. Free of what? Free of his will. I long my imprisoned spirit lay fast bound in sin, and nature's night thine eye diffused a quickening ray. I rose, the dungeon flamed with light. My chains fell off, my heart was free. I rose, went forth and followed thee. No man who's enslaved to himself, enslaved to the evil empire, however you want to put it, no man can release himself. That's one of the fundamentals of the law of slavery. There must be a releaser. There must be a deliverer. I had a family member that was imprisoned in Nazi Germany during the war. They blasted him out of the sky. He made it to the ground in a parachute. They beat him half to death and threw him in prison. He couldn't get out, not as a matter of law. No, he was in another jurisdiction. How did he get out? Well, he said he heard the awfulest racket. All the Germans ran, and here come a Sherman tank busting through the barbed wire. Here come Patton's Third Army. Here come Patton himself. He wanted everybody to see him. Well, that was the deliverer. The United States showed up and delivered him. Moses delivered the people of Israel out of Egypt. He had to have a deliverer, see? Had to have somebody with the ability to do it. And that's the way it is in our individual lives. And the freedom of our country starts with you, and it starts with me. Don't trust the politicians. Don't think that if DJ gets in, it's going to solve all the problems. Well, he'll do what he can, but he's not the deliverer. Jesus Christ is the deliverer. And it's an individual matter. This is personal stuff. What does it come down to? How bad do you want to do the right thing? How bad? Bad enough to walk away from evil, not knowing the future?
So you're saying that walking away from evil is walking away from the living in the city. I mean, it's sounding kind of allegory-ish and not necessarily being interpreted into people's minds as, how do I do this?
That's right. But I just point out again, you make a good point. You always make good points. Abraham just got up and left, not knowing where he was going. It says he did not know where he was going. He just knew he had to get out. And the same thing was true with Israel. When they came out of Egypt, they ended up wandering 40 years, see? And all those and all those that murmured, which amounted to 603,000. 603,548. 603,548 militiamen, their carcasses perished in the wilderness. That's why they wandered so long. God caused that to happen to get rid of all those that murmured against him and did not believe that he would take them into the land that he had delivered the title deed to. That's the book of Deuteronomy, is the title deed to the land of Israel. He delivered it, and they said, we don't believe it. We can't do it. And they started mumbling in their tents quietly. He killed every one of them. Every one. Not the women. No, why? Because they weren't responsible. Who's ultimately responsible? The men. Who's ultimately responsible in America? The women? No, the men. Why? Because the men are the militiamen. The men are the people. The people are the militia. They're ultimately responsible, and they have not done their duty.
I was just going to say, isn't it their duty right now to correct things?
Yes, ma'am. And yes, you make the point. And it starts with men. Men. Women can do what they do, but it's not going to correct the problem. Women are faithful by nature, I'd say more than men. But God says this, a famous verse, oft quoted, but let's get the meaning of it. 2 Chronicles 7:14, I believe it is. Well, whatever it is, I think it's 7:14. It says,
doesn't matter.
Yeah, but it does if you help look it up, but maybe they'll look it up. Well, here it is. It says, if my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves, hear my voice and pray and humble themselves, I will heal their land. That phrase, people, my people, that's Ami in the Hebrew text. The people, oft repeated also, that's the people, Hami, ha, definite article, people. That phrase we have also in our Constitution of the United States. It does not refer to the female of the species. In every case that phrase comes up, people, in the Older Testament, we translate it people.
Does that mean that a woman is not a person? Or
Let me know
for using that word. A person's a bad word to use. But it means less than that. That's an issue I'd like to.
No. Listen, we'll get to that if you let me. But I want to mention this. The word people speaks to the militia. It denotes the militia of the 12 several tribes of Israel.
Okay.
The militia. And in some instances, it's used for militias of other nations, but every time it's used, it refers to an armed band of men, namely the militia of the 12 several tribes. And that distinction is strong in the Hebrew text. We have that our Puritan forebears, the most biblical race of men that ever lived, said Winston Churchill. I don't disagree with him. That phrase lifted out of the Older Testament Hebrew. It's in the New Testament in the Greek, but it's in the Older Testament Hebrew more because most of the Bible's in the Older Testament. But over in our common law,
excuse me, I have to make sure I got this clear. You're saying the Puritans, the ones that came over here and colonized America initially? Is that who you're referring to?
Yeah, I'm talking about, it was the political party that took over Parliament in England And then after Parliament went to war with the Crown, which means the Puritan Party went to war with the Crown.
Mm-hmm.
And then they won, but things got worse. And so they migrated by the hundreds of thousands to New England.
Mm-hmm.
New England, Massachusetts colony, Connecticut colony, and they scattered other places.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't biblical anymore. They've ceased to exist because they were, well, that's another subject. I don't want to get too far afield. But they were biblical. They lifted that phrase out of the Old Testament, and that became one of the phrases that are of our common law, and it's in our Constitution. We, the people of the United States. That's the militia. Those are the ones that ratified the Constitution of the United States. And the people is the militia. The folks that drafted the Constitution said that over and over and over. And go ahead.
So when you're saying what you're saying, to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, and others are as well, when you say we the people, it's referring to the militia, which are the men, essentially. Correct?
Yes. And who would argue otherwise when the Constitution was written? I'm not arguing right or wrong at this point, Gail. I'm just stating the historic fact.
Okay.
It was so far from their thinking that a woman would ever be a part of government in any way. They would never vote. Certainly, they didn't take up arms as a militiaman or as a member of the armed forces.
Now they do, and I've never agreed with that. But anyway, go ahead.
But no, they shouldn't. I agree with you. They're not part of the militia or the armed forces. And if we do that, who's responsible for that? I say again, the men will answer for that. I forget where the camera is. The men will answer for that, and they're the ones that are promoting it. What man in his right mind would say, well, to his wife, I want you to take my daughters and go register for the draft, and I'll stay at home and you go catch bullets and shrapnel. That's the world upside down, friends, neighbors, and kin.
I couldn't agree more. They need to be there to take care of the children. There's no doubt about that. And I mean, even the push for work was nefarious, underhandedly, and unknown at the time, of course. One of the things that I'd like to point out, and we don't even really have to dwell on it, but the militia that came over here, and they slaughtered Native Americans, and I don't know how that can be considered any kind of religious or good thing or anything like that, because it goes against everything that's said in the Bible right out the gate.
Well,
I don't know how they justified that, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, they shouldn't have. Let's put it in context, though. In the early days, when Americans, when the Puritans and the Scotch-Irish Presbyterians and the German and Dutch Reform groups came here, and that made up over 98% of the population when our country started, those three groups. Mm-hmm. Puritans, Anglicans, Congregationalists, English, Scotch-Irish Presbyterians, each of those groups constituted about 1 million people. And when they came here, they faced the red man in New England, for instance, for a century and a half. And the red man was under the influence up there of the Jesuits. And the Jesuits used the red man to slaughter the Englishmen. They slaughtered them without discrimination. Read the Declaration of 76. It says so. And you read history, you see it's true. They say with the
Jesuits, how did they get here? I mean, how were they here ahead of the colonists, or how did the Jesuits do that?
The French Jesuits were in Canada. They were in Canada, but they were right next door, and they, of course, wanted to conquer New England and take it away from England. And then the men and women that went into Kentucky, Kentucky means field of blood. It was a contested hunting ground for the red man. No tribe could ever conclusively claim it, but it was good hunting. Had a lot of buffalo there. Well, the white men that went through the Cumberland Gap into that area, we know that they're on record at least 1,500 white men, the red man roasted and ate alive, or roasted them alive and ate them, because that was part of their culture. Yes. Cannibalism. Those things are, again, just coming back to history.
Some different tribes, though. Not all of them.
Very, a lot of different tribes there. The Shawnee were very dominant, but the Miami and others were there also. Now, as the white man went west, he became increasingly vicious toward the red man. And by the time they got to California in the 1850s, the federal government was giving the state of California $50 for every Indian scalp that a white man would bring in, and they slaughtered them under bounty. And that was true to lesser degree in Arizona and even Nevada. But California, of all the places, was most egregious in the slaughter of the red man. Vicious hate. I mean, let's just go hunting and kill as many as we can. And they did. It got out of hand. But in the early days, no, it was a matter of life and death. And it was, they're going to kill us if we don't kill them, because here they come. That did happen, and it happened a lot, more as men went west. But then increasingly, the tables turned the other way, and the white man got out of hand and did evil things, increasingly evil things, no question. Back to you, Gail.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess that's a little bit off subject, but back to the common law. I was just, it's amazing to me, because I've said that so many times we have people who claim to be Christian, and they're very hypocritical, because if you don't believe what I believe, I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to banish you, or whatever it happens to be at the time. It's just something that I think is hypocritical, and I don't know how else to put it. But anyway, moving right along, let's go to about the right to remain silent, because I saw a quote that you had made about that.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really good, because you had, what are the 8 reasons why you should honor the right to remain silent?
Oh, well, so people can look. That's from the book, probably, Don't Talk to the Police.
Yes, it is, as a matter of fact.
Don't talk. The Ultimate American Weapon, a Common Lawyer Comments. You can find all these books at how to obtain it, www.commonlawyer.com.
I will put that in in the description of this video too, so people can look it up.
You're very kind. But in this book, I make the point that you have a fundamental right. Again, what's a fundamental right? A fundamental right is a duty given straight to you from God with no mediator, just you and God. Mm-hmm. And the right of governance over your tongue is a fundamental right. That means it's straight from God. It comes in 2 parts. You have the right, that's the responsibility. Remember, the old Anglo word, the old Germanic word right means duty. Okay. That's what it means. I learned when I was a kid, every right has a corresponding duty. That's not true. A right is a duty. And you have a duty to speak when you discern in your understanding that God wants you to speak, and to keep your mouth shut when you think he wants you to keep your mouth shut. Mm-hmm. And the governance of your tongue, that's the 2 sides of it. The right to remain silent, the duty, is First Amendment. The First Amendment doesn't give us that. No, God gave it to you. The First Amendment is the recognition that we're going to make sure government doesn't violate that. And then the Fifth Amendment is the right to not talk. Flip sides of the same coin. Talk, not talk. And if government doesn't defend that fundamental responsibility that you have to govern your tongue as you see fit, then we've lost the enjoyment. We can't lose the duty. God gave it to us. What God has put together in you, no man can tear asunder. He can't tear it apart. You've often heard that said of marriage. Well, the Bible teaches that that's true of the inalienable, as our Declaration of 76.
I was going to ask you, you must have read my mind, because that was the next question. Well, is that part of is it inalienable or unalienable? Or is that
as a practical matter, and it goes too far, it's patriot mythology to say it's unalienable, as some people. Well, is it unalienable? Yes, it's unalienable, but that's not what that word says. That word unalienable means alien. It means away from another place, like an alien stranger from another country. But if something's unalienable, that means you can't, by law or process of law, I can't and nobody else can take that from me. Why? Because it's inextricably bound up in who I am, the way God made me. You see, when God, the Bible, people say, I'm made in the image of God. Every individual is made in the image of God. What does that mean? Well, that means that it's out of his imagination, his holy imagination. He imagined what you would look like and what you would be like, and his imagination, and then he made it. And there you are. Form, shape, everything about you, inside and out. And by the way, it's important to drop a footnote about that and say God made you out of his imagination, and he forbids you to return the compliment. It's idolatry to draw a picture of what you think God looks like. It's even idolatry to put up a picture of Jesus Christ. Why? Because he is very God of very God and very man of very man. He's very God. And to put up a picture of him is blasphemous. Why? Because the Bible says so. Do you know what he looks like? Of course you don't. People say, I've seen him. No, you haven't. You saw something maybe, but it wasn't him. You may have thought it was him, but it wasn't. You didn't see him because he's not come back yet. He's coming. You'll get to see him. But I hope you're on the right side. Hope you're on his side when he makes that appearance. Well, back to you, Gail.
Okay, well, there were other reasons for remaining silent. I think that we were getting at least, you know.
I was looking here, Gail. I'm looking at the table of contents for a chapter that says reasons. Oh, yeah, I remember that now. Why you ought not talk to the police is what it says. Page 29. Let's look at that briefly. Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, I guess one of the things that stood out to me when I was looking at that was that you had said that one of the reasons you should not talk to police or other government agents is because prosecutors are very skilled at twisting innocent words and even exonerating words against the one having spoken them. So in other words, they don't have much of a conscience when they do these things, because they will take things out of context, twist it around, and try to influence the jury in a very, negative way against a man or woman who was trying to essentially protect themselves and may not have, because of something that they said that this other prosecutor can twist around to their liking.
Well, you don't need to be afraid of government employees, but on the other hand, you need to just not talk to them unless you have to, because even the things you say that are innocent, for example, somebody like a policeman accuses you of a crime. I didn't do that. Here's what I did. And then you start talking. Don't ever do that. Don't try to justify yourself in front of somebody who doesn't care. Police officers don't care. Sheriff's deputies, enforcement, prosecutors, they don't care. Judges don't even care. No.
That's pathetic.
They will use, if you say I didn't do it, and then they end up taking you to trial and convicting you, then they could turn around and convicting you for lying to a police officer because you said you didn't do it, and now we've got a conviction that says you did. You think I'm exaggerating? I've seen that kind of activity.
That's evil.
Yes, it is, but we recognize the evil of the heart of man, and you give a man a badge, a position such as a prosecutor, you put a big caliber pistol on his hip, that's like giving him a fur coat. He thinks he's King Kong.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the problems there is that they have qualified immunity. They shouldn't have any immunity, because either you do right or you do wrong. And immunity means you can do whatever is wrong you want and still get away with it. And that's what they do. And that's what's happened.
But how do you defend against it? And the way to defend against it is you don't talk to them. You don't give them what they want. The only tool they have then, if you don't do that, they're varying levels of torture. You see, it's the law of the city. Here's a great distinction between the law of the land and the law of the city. The law of the city says the ends justifies the means. The law of the land says the means justifies the end. The means, the process. If you follow the process, says the law of the land, or common law, then the result is reliable. Well, the law of the city, it's the motto of the Jesuit order. They don't try to hide it. They say the ends justifies the means. Well, if the ends justifies the means, and if it does, then torture is lawful.
That's the thing.
Right?
That's interesting.
If what I want is a conviction, torture becomes lawful. And there's all sorts of torture. You can separate a man from his wife and children. That's done a lot in America. You can accuse him and give him mental anguish, tell him what you're going to do to him, whether you know it or not. That gives him mental anguish. You can also keep food and water from him. You can throw him in solitary confinement. That happens a lot in America. That's torture.
Torture. It is torture.
You can waterboard him. That's torture. Listen, I don't want this to be ignored. I've got to say it. The Bible, nowhere in all of the bloody warfare of this book called the Bible, and there's a lot in here. Nowhere does the will of God, which is the law of God, the will of the sovereign is law. Nowhere is there a hint that torture is lawful. And nowhere in our common law ever has torture ever, in the history of it, as far as we can go back, lost in the fog of antiquity, nowhere is that lawful. Does it occur in a common law country? Yes, it does. But that doesn't mean it's lawful. That's just like no place in the common law, in the history going back hundreds, 1,500 years, can we find any indication that slavery is lawful. Did it occur in England? Yeah, it was ignored. But you can't be lawfully a slave at common law. It's not possible. And by the way, that was one of the reasons why slavery was allowed in America. Why was it allowed in America? Because England said the common law does not apply in our American colonies. William Blackstone's first volume says that. I'm quoting, "The common law does not apply in our American plantations." Well, if the common law doesn't apply, slavery is okay. And that's what they said. The common law applied in England, say, but the king said, "I'm king in England, but I'm emperor in America." That's the law of the city. Well, what follows then after that? No right to keep and bear arms. That's why we had Lexington and Concord. No right to be free from unlawful searches and seizures. That's why we have the Fourth Amendment. Because the common law, always at common law, there was to be no searches and seizures of things or men without a lawful warrant. See, the Constitution put these things in. They were already part of the common law. England had tried to deny that from us by saying, and this is where the admiralty law comes in, Gail. See, admiralty law is just one expression of the law of the city. There are about four major ones: admiralty law, administrative law, equity, and martial law. And all of those are forms of martial law. No jury, government by a single will, one man or combination of men passing legislation saying this is the law, the courts don't matter, there are no independent branches of government.
Just like,
and that's what, go ahead.
Well, just like what that was reminding me of is they put people in jail now before they even have a conviction. It's guilty until proven innocent, which means guilty right out the gate.
Right.
They held them right here in Arizona in jails for years at times, awaiting a trial, which I have since found out is also the way the jury selection has been allowed to go on, and most people will not and do not even know this, is through some computerized selection process of people that will help give the prosecutor what they want.
Yeah,
that's dreadfully wrong.
And it goes on in every state to varying degrees, and the federal jurisdiction also. But it's up to us. It's up to us. Now, I have a two-pronged attack, and I want everybody to join me if I get them to do it. I want everybody to join me. Two-pronged attack to make corrections.
Okay.
And I didn't come up with this by myself. I like to read history and study it. And this is the method that John Wycliffe used in England in the 1300s. And it worked. It took a long time, but it worked. Mm-hmm. And that's why America is here. John Wycliffe was the first man to translate the entire Bible into the English, the Anglo-Saxon tongue. And he didn't have the original tongue manuscripts, the Greek and the Hebrew and the Aramaic, because they just weren't available in Europe at that time, hadn't got there yet. He did have the Latin Vulgate of Jerome, and so he used it. But he said this, and this is the two-pronged attack. He said there's two things we've got to do to save our country. Two things. Number one, we have to get the Bible into our native tongue, English, so that the boy behind the plow can read it. Number two, we have to get the law of the city out of Oxford, which was the university of that day, and he was a professor there at Merton College. We got to get the law of the city out of Oxford and teach the common law. The common law must supplant the teaching of the law of the city. See, there were two levels there. And I believe he was right.
Yeah, I do too.
The Bible has to be put in accurately and rawly, R-A-W. Enough of these translations that aren't raw, and most of them aren't. Well, they wouldn't sell if they were raw. Oh, by the way, I want to say something about this with your permission, Gail. This is part of my attack. Okay. This is the good book. A common lawyer translates and annotates from the original tongues. Translator, Brent, Allan, Winters, yours truly. And I call it Toward a Raw translation from the original tongues. 15,000 footnotes, 4 volumes, 123 detailed appendices in the back, tracing the major themes through the warp and the woof of the text, the context of the Bible. I call it toward a raw translation. People say, well, but is it literal? Well, I make it as literal as I can, but that's not the question. There are a lot of literal, well, not a lot. There's some literal translations out there. There's some real good ones. The New American Standard is one of them, but it's not raw. The Bible, I don't want to cook the book, Gail. I want to deliver it up just like it was delivered to me in the original tongues. And I want people to be able to read it and say, wow, is that what God said? Yeah, because God communicates, our lawgiver. He communicates right down to the ground so everybody can understand. You want to be educated? Stay in this book. Forget the classic literature of the Greeks and stay in this book. That's what will change our nation. It is what it changed. It is what made us what we are, the most powerful engine of wealth and prosperity the world has ever known because of this book. Listen, the people that founded this country, they knew something about the ancient classical literature. But remember, the people that they call the founders, they weren't the ones that founded this country. The ones that founded this country were the people of the United States that ratified. They're the ones that said, yes, we'll take that document. And the people that were having at the convention, all those famous names, Jefferson and Madison, Washington, and all those fellows, they were politicians. They were putting into words. That's what a politician does that's successful. He puts into words what people are thinking because they like that. They did that. And the Constitution is one of the chief expressions, and they ratified it. They said yes, because it's a common law document, and they saw that. There was a lawyer back in the year 1842, a young lawyer, and he got to wondering what in the Sam Hill could have motivated the beleaguered, ragged, underfed, under-equipped colonial militiamen, the people, to dare the odds against the best trained and best fed and best equipped military forces in the world at that time, namely English regulars and German Hessians. What could motivate them to do that? So he went out looking for veterans of the historic battles of Concord and Lexington. He found this old fella, 91 years old. His name was Preston. He was captain of the militia there at Concord. He found him, 91 years old, interviewed him. He said, were you oppressed by intolerable oppressions? He said, oppressions? He said, I didn't feel any. He said, well, what about the Stamp Act? He said, I never bought one of those stamps, never even saw one, certainly never paid a penny for one. He said, well, what about the tea tax? He said, tea tax? He said, never drank a drop of the stuff. The boys threw it all over. He said, well, maybe, he said, this young lawyer said, well, maybe this guy's an intellectual. So he said, well, I suppose then you'd been reading Harrington and Sidney and Locke about the eternal principles of liberty. He said, I never heard of them. He said, we read only the Bible, the Catechism, Watts, Psalms, and hymns, and the Almanac. That's a significant statement. We're talking about the captain of the militia and the rest of the militia. No, we know from history we're the same way. They read only the Bible, the Catechism, Watts, Psalms, and hymns, and the Almanac. The Catechism, yes, there were several, well, not several, but there were Protestant catechisms at that time. Mm-hmm. Westminster Confession, Luther's Confession, the Lutheran Confession, written Martin Luther, author. There was the Dutch and German Reformed Confession. I have trouble with those big fancy German words. I'm almost on the tip of my tongue to say, not Heidelberg. Well, they had theirs too. That's what they read. Mm-hmm. He didn't know anything about the philosophers. Well, then he said, well, if that's not it, then what was the matter? And what did you mean going to the fight? And he said, young man, what we meant in going for those redcoats was this. We had always governed ourselves, and we always meant to. They didn't mean that we should. And that's the bottom line. What is it that motivated them? It wasn't the classic authors of the Greek world. Well, what was it? At bottom, it was the Bible, the laws of nature. That's what that phrase means, unwritten, in creation.
Mhm.
And the laws of nature's God, says Blackstone, lex scripta, written in the Bible. That's what motivated them. And there is nothing on the faces of God's earth that will motivate us to what we need to do except that. And if you aren't looking at it daily, the written, revealed religion, as the reformers put it in the Bible, responsible for America being here and what it is, that's what we're losing.
It doesn't take a religion, so to speak, in my opinion, to read the Bible, or to take quotes from the Bible, or to follow what it's stated in there.
And I take it, Gail, that when you say religion, you're talking about some organized denomination, but that's
exactly.
The Bible uses the word religion and says this. It says there is one true religion. That's true. There's one. It's got to be the right one. There are only two traditions of religion, law, and government in the world, and never have been any more than two. There's the true one, and then the false one under 1,000 or more labels, and the labels are constantly changing, but it's all the same putrid stuff. And that's what the Bible teaches. So what is religion? I want to say this, if I may. Let's look at the word. That's where I like to start. There's more in the history of the etymology of words than there is in the history of military campaigns. Religion. It's a Latin-rooted word. It's a good word. It's context neutral. You got to put it in context. But religion is this. Re means back and again, back or again. And ligare, we get a word ligament from ligare. It means to bind. What is religion then? Well, what it is a binding back, a commitment back to your lawgiver. Jesus Christ put it this way. The Bible puts it this way, I should say. That's Jesus Christ, I suppose. But it says this, we love him because he first loved us. You see, it's the response back that is the religion. People say, well, I don't have religion. I got a relationship with God. That's silly talk. Why? Because your religion is your relationship with God. It is your response back to him because what he did on your behalf for your betterment.
Most people interpret that as a specific denomination, though. When you say religion, they think, Presbyterian, Catholic, Lutheran, Episcopalian, whatever. Whatever one you want to pick.
That doesn't define a man's relationship with his maker. There is nothing.
I couldn't agree more.
I know you. What's that? I'm sorry, Gail.
No, I said I couldn't agree more. It
doesn't. Yeah. Wycliffe put it this way. Wycliffe said that God wants men, individual men, to worship. That means to recognize the worth. Worship is an old word that means worthy. The old word is worthy-ship. It is to recognize the worth of your maker. That's what it is. And he says every man is duty bound to do that under the open vault of heaven with no intermediating person or institution or denomination or government or priesthood. Why? Because anything comes between you and your maker is a fraud. That's why the book of Hebrews says there is one mediator, one medium. Medium's a good translation between God and man, and that is the man, Christ Jesus, who, by the way, is God reduced to the span of a man. So if there's nothing between you and Jesus Christ, there's nothing between you and your maker. Matter of fact, the Bible says he, that member of the Godhead, made you from the authority of the Godhead. He entered the stream of humanity in a brotherly way when the Virgin gave birth to him. Well, so that's good. And you had mentioned this when we talked yesterday, I think, a little about religion. I wanted to make that clear. You're right. And you hit the nail, I like to say, like Hendrickson says, with your head when you said that when people think of religion, they think of denomination and institutions. That's not what the Bible says religion is. And there's only one true one. It's even, by the way, one way we say it is the law of the land. That's religion, law, and government. And the law of the city. And you can't separate the two. Religion is your response back to your lawmaker for what your response. He crossed the line first. He did something for you. No, he did a lot for you. He couldn't have done any more. And it is your response back to him that is a religion. Let's draw a distinction, if I may, Gail. Islam, the religion of the Japanese during World War II, just as two examples. In both of those religions, men ultimately die for their God. Men die for their God. My father was at Okinawa during the whole battle. He watched men try to die for their God. They kamikaze. They were dying for their God. Who was their God? The emperor. Well, who was the emperor? Well, they said he was 142 generations direct descendant, a descendant of the heavenly body called the sun. And they had the genealogical record, still do, they say, to prove it. But they died for him. In Islam, who do you die for? You die for Allah. But in the true religion, how does it work there? Your lawgiver dies for you. It's just the other way around. He died for you.
Well, okay. That's where religion divides people.
You ain't a kid.
At a time when we need to be united. So that's a problem.
Well, it does create a problem, but Jesus Christ said, I came to bring division. And the truth will always divide men into the evil empire and those that want to follow the true lawgiver. And there's any compromise between the two will result in the most bloody of warfare. And that's why men go to wars over that, always. War, according to the Bible again, and according to history as you see it, war is always a religious activity, because if you can't agree, if two countries or even two men cannot agree on a common external standard of law whereby to govern their relationship, they have two choices. They either have to get away from each other, stay away from each other, or they will come to blows, and they will come ultimately to annihilation. And the Japs said this, for example, our God has told us that the time has come to bring all of the world under the common 9-cornered pagoda of our God, the Emperor of Japan. And so they murdered over 2,000 Americans. And we as a people said to ourselves, well, our God doesn't say that. And you can't do that to us without us trying to stop you. And so we went after them. It was terrible. Did we have any choice in that case? But you see, it all came down to their God. Their God, the one that they said told them to do that. And they were out and they'd already murdered and raped and pillaged and plundered China. Well, that's the way warfare works. And now we have Islam, and just as ugly. And it says we want to kill everyone who does not say this, does not say there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. That's their official religion. That's what they say they must do, kill everybody who doesn't say that. Well, what's to be our response to that? That's the reality of life. And that's the reality of life. I can't explain it. I know what God tells me to do in the face of it. He tells me to tell people the truth, and that's what I do. And if I don't do that, if you don't do it, if others don't do it, then when the hell falls, it will fall on them. So yeah, it does divide, but without division, the truth will never come forth. And I'm not willing to live in Babylon and live a lie. I don't want other people to be willing to do that either. And that's what's encroaching on us and encroaching upon our courts and our government and all of our institution rapidly. Well,
very rapidly.
Yeah, go ahead, Gail.
I just said very rapidly.
Yeah, give me a breather. I'm
Okay. Well, without further ado, we're probably getting close to having to wind this up, mainly because if it gets too long, it takes a lot longer to process and causes more difficulty in getting it out there. It's easier to have another session. But ultimately, I think it's absolutely critical now that people are aware that the Constitution is based on common law, which is based on a lot of biblical examples or so on.
Oh, well, yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, it is. The Constitution's a brief of common law government, but our common law, the laws of nature, as our Declaration of 76 puts it, is not based on the Bible. That's a misstatement. Okay. Our common law is the revelation and the relationships between things and people and people and people and things that we see around us, that we learn, observe. That's a law that comes direct from God, and he reveals it to us in our surroundings. It's not that the laws of nature are based upon the laws of nature's God, the Bible. No. It is the laws of nature come direct from God in 2 volumes here. One volume unwritten, the laws of nature, and the other volume, Lex Scripta, the laws of nature's God. But they're compatible because they come from the common source of the Godhead, and the Godhead is consistent within itself. And because the Godhead is consistent within itself, all that the Godhead does is consistent. That's what we call science. That's why we have the scientific method. That's why the laws of nature allow us to make discoveries, because God doesn't speak out of both sides of his mouth, and he does not act in inconsistent ways. That's what it means when it says, Deuteronomy chapter 6, the oldest creed known to man, still recited around the world, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Hear, O Israel, the Lord, our God, Yahuwah, our God, is one Lord. He's one. That means he has oneness. That Hebrew word, Old Testament Hebrew. Echad. It's not an ordinal, 1, 2, 3, 4 in a series, one in a series of other numbers. It's a cardinal. Echad. That means oneness, unity. That's what it means. Back to you.
Okay. Well, I guess the only other thing on that comes to mind, because I've heard it so many times, is there were numerous books that were removed from the Bible, and how much would that impact the things that are said? That,
Yeah, that's a popular thing to say, and most people that say it, I've discovered, are repeating a mantra that they've maybe heard from a professor or somebody else. But who's got time to look into such things? That's a massive subject. But
it's in the basement of the Vatican, isn't it?
Well, there are the books of the Bible. There are manuscripts in the Vatican. Vaticanus is a complete manuscript of the Greek New Testament, and it's an important witness to the veracity of the New Testament. It's all in capital letters, and there's good evidence that it's possible that Constantine is the one that commissioned. It's one of the copies that he commissioned, but we don't know that. That's speculation, but it is a good manuscript. It's an old manuscript. It's consistent with a couple of other manuscripts and consistent with all of the New Testament manuscripts. It's a veritable embarrassment of riches, almost 6,000 manuscripts in the original tongues of the Greek New Testament from the most ancient of times, written by hand, and 10,000 in Latin. Of course, that's not the primary evidence. The only writing of the ancient world that comes in second, and it doesn't come close, is the Iliad of Homer, of which there are about 600 copies that are available. And those copies are woefully inconsistent among themselves. A lot of variations. The New Testament manuscripts aren't that way. There are variations, but they're all variations without a meaning. Spelling of a word, for instance, or maybe the presence of an article that doesn't even change the meaning. Well, that's what the New Testament has. Over almost 6,000, the Iliad, 600, and all the other Greek writers and Roman writers, the historian Tacitus, people like that, never more than 20, and most of them, there's only 6 manuscripts, about a half a dozen, maybe, between half a dozen and 20. And again, they're woefully in disagreement and variation. The New Testament doesn't have that problem. It's not like we don't have evidence running out our ears of manuscript, and there'll probably, well, I know there will be more found. There are all the time.
What is the oldest?
Going back to the first century. Go ahead, Gail.
What is the oldest scripture, particularly the New Testament, because much of the Old Testament was basically undermined by the New Testament?
Well, no, the older Testament, I wouldn't say that. The New Testament, here's one way people put it. The Old Testament is in the New Testament revealed, and the New Testament is in the Older Testament somewhat concealed. But God doesn't talk out of both sides of his mouth, and I've been looking at it for 4 decades now, pretty lively. And I've always said, if I ever find not an inconsistency, but a contradiction in the Bible,
how about eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth?
Yeah, I won't believe it, and I have yet to find a contradiction. But back to the oldest manuscript of the Newer Testament is a piece of papyri discovered in the 1930s in a basement in a cardboard box that had been collected from a trash dump in Egypt. A piece of papyri that is dated on all hands between 90 and 120 AD. It's from the Gospel of John, chapter 18, about as big as the palm of your hand. It's written on both sides. And by the way, Christian folk who compiled manuscripts in the early centuries are the ones that invented the book. the book. So you could turn the pages. Before that, it was scrolls, and they wrote on both sides because the papyri was expensive. They bound them together, and they could turn the pages. And that increased the writing of the Bible and the use of it, as it did a lot of other works. But that piece of papyri, well, John the Apostle was the only one of the 12-member jury, Jesus Christ impaneled to witness the evidence of his identity. There's your jury. Two alternate jurors, he impaneled those, and one of them was put in because Judas killed himself. And he had to deliver. Well, John was the only one that wasn't murdered. He was the foreman, as it were, of that jury. And he wrote his books as he approached age 100. And so if we can take his writing of the gospel back to 90 AD, and we arguably can now, as one fellow said, the apostolic ink was hardly dry. And that ruined about 2 trainloads of higher criticism and German scholarship who said there couldn't have been a New Testament book written or copied or written before about 400 AD. They said it was all just made up, see? Well, that's not what the evidence says on a lot of hands.
Okay, because I have heard something to that effect, like how could this be written by these so-called disciples if in fact it was all written well after they were even alive anymore? And how did they get these names that don't equate with where they grew up or what have you?
Well, number one, would point out that manuscripts go back to the early centuries, and the evidence is strong for a lot of reasons. But of course, you can apply the common law rules of evidence to the manuscripts of the New Testament, and particularly the Gospels, because if you can establish the reliability of the Gospel records using just simple rules of evidence of what's reliable, then that establishes all of the Bible because of the statements of Jesus Christ found therein. And the Gospel records, you apply, for instance, the ancient document rule of the common laws of evidence. The ancient document rule of the common law of evidence, you use it, well, I've seen it used in court. Any document in most states, they'll have a statute that'll even say this. Any document over 20, some states 30 years old, the ancient document rule applies. Well, you bring in an old document. Obviously, the manuscripts of the New Testament are ancient documents over 20, 30 years old. But if you apply those rules, the first question you ask is, are there any marks of forgery on the face of these documents? And of the almost 6,000 I'd mentioned, there aren't any marks of forgery. There aren't any marks of forgery. Okay, well, it passes that prong of the test. Number 2, do we find those documents where we would expect to find them? And the answer, again, is true. Yes, we do. We find them where we would expect to find them, in the custody of those people that read them and believe that they're true. That's where we would expect it. Some people say, well, that's the church. Well, the institution called the church, yes, and believers all over the ancient world, you find them. We find them where we would expect to find them. That's the ancient document rule, and it passes both of those tests. But there are other tests at common law. For instance, you could take the writings of Peter. Peter writes the book, his 2 epistles. He wrote 2 of the epistles of the New Testament, and in one of them, he's saying, I know I'm going to die real soon. I'm going to die real soon. And he wrote both of them together. Well, let's apply the rule called die and declaration, the rule of evidence of our common law. Anything that a man says, if he really believes he's going to die real soon, we let that in as hearsay. It's an exception to the hearsay rule. And why? Well, because we've learned that if a man really believes he's going to die, he'll say the truth probably. Now, sometimes a man will believe he's going to die and then he doesn't die. Well, that doesn't mean that if you can show that he believed he was going to die, that's still, maybe he has cancer and he's about to die and somehow he pulls through. But the die and declaration exception to the hearsay rule still applies. And you can go then to the book of Acts. Who wrote more of the New Testament than any other person? People say Paul the Apostle. Why? Well, he wrote over a dozen books, and there are only 27. Well, Paul wrote a lot, but he didn't write more than any other writer. The man that wrote more of the New Testament than any other man in number of pages is Luke. He wasn't an Israelite. He was a medical doctor. And he wrote the book of the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. And both of those books, amazingly, don't have any doctrine in them at all. They don't make any speculation about doctrine. They don't make any philosophical statements. They are purely writings of history. This is what was said, and this is what happened. And it makes no opinion, the writer, Luke, makes no opinion whether what was said was right or wrong or what was done was right or wrong. He reports the facts, and add to that, he says at the beginning, the 4 verses at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, introducing both of those books, are written in Attic Greek. It's the only classic Attic Greek in the New Testament. Well, why was it written in Attic Greek? For 2 reasons. Number one, Luke was a highly educated man, and he knew Attic Greek. And number 2, he was writing to an official government. He was writing to an official of government, and he was writing an official document to make an official report as to what Christianity is and the state of it in the Roman Empire. Well, that's an exception to the hearsay rule. It also written in the course of government procedure. All you could apply in different ways, but it's an overwhelming abundance of reliability, no matter how you come at these documents of the Bible. And so nothing else in the ancient world even comes close as a matter of evidence. And everything we do as members of Adam's race, our Maker wants us to do on good evidence. And he says, I'll give you the evidence of the truth. The only question is, are you persuadable? And he is the one who makes you persuadable. Again, I can refer back to the Bible about that, but that would be just more talk, and I'll take another breather and let you chime in.
Okay. I think we're going to have to come to a close because I think we've been going for over almost 2 hours now. So, or at least an hour and a half.
Yeah.
1:30. So that gets to be difficult to process in post-production. So I would like to thank you very much for all the information that you have imparted to us, which includes, the common law, the Constitution, and 1776, and the Declaration, and also your biblical references to much of this. So I appreciate that very much, and I'm sure the audience will as well. And I would hope there would be a call to duty of Americans that fit that description, so that the things that are happening in our country right now are brought to a stop.
The strength of our country depends more upon what happens in your house than it does what happens in the White House or the State House or the courthouse. Of that, there is no question. We must give attention to doing what God wants us to do. And we can't know what he wants us to do unless we know his law. What is his law? Well, it's the revelation of his will. That's simply what it is. The will of the sovereign's a law in every country. Whoever a country takes for its sovereign, that's law. And God has given that will to us. It comes in 2 volumes. The laws of nature, says our declaration. The laws of nature, unwritten in the nature of things, lex non scripta, says Blackstone. And the laws of nature is God written in this volume we call the Bible, lex scripta. Thank you, Gail.
Others?
Thank you so much for allowing me to talk.
Yes. And could we add to that, do unto others as you would have them do unto you?
Well, of course. Jesus Christ did that. Yeah.
I know.
How could I say no?
That was one of his great statements. So anyway, with that, I'd like to close and thank you very much for being my guest, and perhaps we may do this again. I think it's so important that people are aware of what this country was founded on, and that it is slipping away and we need to pull it back. And it starts at home. It starts with everyone. Would you agree?
Certainly, Gail. It starts at home. You did a good job of summarizing what I'd said. That was kind of you.
All right. Well, I agree with you. So thank you very much, everyone. And we will close for this session. Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye, Gail.
Bye-bye. Hello, everyone. This is Gail of Gaia. I'm the founder and producer of Free Range. I do my best to bring you the best in guests and information that's very relevant to you today. I'm making this short little clip today in order to ask you to please contribute to the channel. I'm not monetized by YouTube. I don't sell any products, and I don't have Patreon. So I depend upon your contributions. And I know everyone's having a tough time, but even a small amount from a number of people would help tremendously. So thank you. Please contribute. And again, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I do need your help. Thank you.
This Free Range Productions program is presented for information purposes only. The opinions expressed may not necessarily reflect the opinions of the hosts, Free Range Productions, its principal supporters, or staff. Viewers are directed to use their own research and discernment with respect to any information presented here.